All right, welcome to today's Explainer. We are stepping way back in time to the absolute coldest winter England had seen in years. I want you to picture it. Snow is just burying the roads. London's grandest houses are glittering with candlelight, and yet, right beneath all that dazzling wealth, there's this quiet, hidden world that high society completely ignored. Today we're diving into a genuinely fascinating story all about duty, sacrifice, and what it means to be truly seen. We're going to unpack the remarkable tale of the Silver Winter Rose. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's dive into this. Our story kicks off with a really poignant thought. On the coldest winter England had seen, a woman named Eleanor Hartwell believed her life had already reached its quiet conclusion. This perfectly sets the stage for us. We're introduced to Eleanor, and at 43 years old, she isn't celebrated, she isn't admired. In fact, society has pretty much deemed her invisible. She's an unmarried woman whose youth just kind of slipped away entirely unnoticed by the world around her.
Now, look at this contrast, because it really couldn't be sharper. On one side, we have Eleanor. She had actually turned down a perfectly respectable marriage proposal years ago so she could care for her dying parents. She traded her own dreams for duty, basically becoming a compassionate but invisible companion. And on the flip side, we have her employer, Lady Beatrice Ashcombe. Lady Beatrice is literally everything society values on the surface. She's wealthy, she's beautiful, she's highly fashionable. But behind closed doors, she is entirely selfish and incredibly manipulative.
20 years. Just let that sink in for a second. 2 whole decades. That is how long Eleanor spent serving this vain woman. Throughout all that time, she was constantly mocked by the younger servants who would whisper that she belonged more with the dusty old portraits than with the living guests. But while all the fashionable ladies were out competing for admiration, Eleanor was the one getting things done. She was the gentle problem solver, managing the correspondence, soothing tempers, and handling all the messy issues no one else wanted to touch. She kept her quiet dignity, ultimately learning that silence often carried a lot more weight than wounded pride.
Well, that perfectly sets the stage for Act 1, the Duke's Masquerade.
So all of London is buzzing, preparing for this magnificent winter masquerade hosted by the Duke of Ravensshire. We're talking the wealthiest, most respected, and desirable bachelor in all of England. Naturally, Lady Beatrice gets a personal invite, but she schemes to secretly spend the evening with another gentleman. To avoid offending the Duke, she forces a very reluctant Eleanor to go in her place, disguised in her late mother's elegant burgundy velvet gown and wearing an ivory mask. Eleanor treks through the snow, planning to just hide in the corner of this dazzling, chandelier-lit ballroom. But then the Duke walks in. And get this, he completely ignores every single celebrated beauty and young debutante throwing themselves at him. Instead, he walks right up to Eleanor, bows with total respect, and asks her for the first waltz. What hooked him wasn't some practiced flirty routine. It was her thoughtful honesty and her gentle wit. For the first time in decades, Eleanor was actually truly seen.
Now, what's really interesting about this next moment is what happens after their dance. The Duke presents her with something extraordinary, an exquisite silver winter rose decorated with tiny white pearls. He explains that while real flowers wither and die in winter, this one symbolizes a devotion strong enough to survive every single season. I mean, wow, this wasn't just a cheap trinket. A gesture like this from a duke was a massive deal. It represented a weather-tested, mature connection, and honestly, the entire ballroom was absolutely floored to witness it.
But, as you might guess, that bubble of happiness bursts pretty fast. Welcome to Act 2, a sudden scandal.
Out of nowhere, Lady Beatrice crashes the masquerade. She is absolutely furious to find the Duke giving all of his attention to her lowly companion. Right there, in the middle of the glittering crowd, she accuses Eleanor of deception. She literally rips the ivory mask off Eleanor's face, exposing her age, and demands the truth be laid bare. Can you imagine the gasp in that room? The aristocratic crowd is instantly ready to mock her and spread vicious rumors. But the Duke? He doesn't flinch, he doesn't step away. Instead, he gently takes Eleanor's hand. He calmly defends her to the room, saying he sees no deception at all, just a woman who faithfully followed an order. His quiet authority completely shuts down the mocking voices, and he leads her away to a peaceful winter conservatory far from the toxic energy of the ballroom.
In that quiet, frozen conservatory, we get this beautiful, raw exchange of secrets. Eleanor lays it all out, how she sacrificed love to care for her parents, and had basically accepted a life of loneliness. And rather than pitying her, the Duke is in awe of her courage. Then he reveals his own secret. Despite all his wealth and his grand title, the guy is desperately lonely. Every conversation he has is rehearsed. Every compliment he gets is totally calculated. Eleanor is literally the first person to speak to him honestly without trying to get something out of him. These parallel confessions connect them on such a profound emotional level. But here is the kicker, you guys. Someone is secretly eavesdropping on this beautiful conversation.
By the very next day, things spiral out of control fast. Let's look at this timeline. By morning, wildly exaggerated gossip is everywhere, sweeping through London's newspapers, claiming Eleanor manipulated the Duke. By midday, Lady Beatrice swiftly fires Eleanor, accusing her of disgracing the household. And by the afternoon, Eleanor is already packing a small suitcase. Taking nothing but her few personal belongings and that silver winter rose, she heads back to a modest little cottage she inherited. She lost everything familiar in the blink of an eye. But you know what? She kept the one thing that actually mattered, her dignity.
That evening, the tension is just off the charts. There is a fierce blizzard raging outside Eleanor's little cottage. And then, a sudden knock on her humble door. No way, right? It's the Duke. He steps right out of his carriage into the freezing storm, completely ignoring all the nosy villagers peeking through their curtains, and he invites Eleanor to take a walk with him beneath this ancient oak tree. As they're standing out there in the snow, the Duke shares this incredibly powerful observation. He says, "Society praised honor while rewarding selfishness." It's such a striking condemnation of their world, isn't it? He absolutely refuses to let kindness become a casualty of whatever the fashionable opinion is that day. And right after saying that, he pulls a simple gold ring from his pocket, his late mother's ring, and asks Eleanor if she would allow him to spend the rest of their winters by her side.
But hold on. Before she can even answer him, we are thrown into Act 3, The Servants Speak.
Let's dive right into how this scene builds because it is wild. Lady Beatrice, refusing to let things go, actually shows up in the middle of the snowstorm to interrupt the proposal. She starts publicly accusing Eleanor all over again, yelling that she manipulated the Duke from day one. She's trying to destroy Eleanor for good. But remember that person secretly eavesdropping in the conservatory? The truth finally explodes as the servants themselves step forward. The butler vouches for Eleanor's absolute honesty. The housekeeper describes her endless compassion. The cook steps up and recalls how Eleanor always gave her own food to the needy. The stable master reveals she secretly paid for his 6 sons' medicine out of her own pocket. Even the young maid who used to make fun of her admits that Eleanor only ever answered their cruelty with kindness. Piece by piece, this overwhelming mountain of evidence proving Eleanor's goodness just completely dismantles Beatrice's lies.
Which brings us to an absolute mic drop moment from the Duke. Looking dead in the eye of her former employer, he calmly states, Lady Beatrice had never feared deception, she had feared comparison. Boom! I mean, what a line. This completely shatters Beatrice's high ground. She can't even defend herself against the truth, so she is forced to just turn around and leave in total silence. Finally alone again in the falling snow, the Duke asks Eleanor once more if she will marry him, and through her tears, she whispers, yes.
And that brings us to the aftermath and our final resolution, a quiet legend.
Months later, the couple completely rejects the massive, superficial society wedding everyone expected of a duke. Instead, they tie the knot in a tiny stone chapel surrounded by snow-covered pines. They exchange simple vows promising honesty and steadfast love, totally ditching the empty romance high society is so obsessed with. And then they actually put their shared values to work. They transform Ravenshire House, they strip away the superficial grandeur, open their doors to welcome other elderly women who had been pushed aside by society, and they treat every single servant with absolute fairness and respect. They prove that compassion is infinitely more valuable than status.
And here's my favorite detail. At their wedding, and every single winter after that, Eleanor wore that exact same burgundy gown from the Masquerade, beautifully restored. And right there, pinned above her heart, was the silver winter rose. Every year, they returned to the ballroom to remember the very night when an invisible woman was finally and truly seen by the only person who mattered. Their story turned into a legend, proving for sure that love isn't just for the young or the privileged, it thrives wherever you find true, weather-tested devotion.
The story of the Silver Winter Rose really reminds us that true devotion isn't measured by time, but by having the courage to recognize the beauty that the rest of the world just decides to ignore. So as we wrap up, I want to leave you with this question to chew on. Where is the overlooked beauty in your world? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I seriously challenge you to look just a little closer at the invisible things around you today. See you next time!